A millionaire spent a fortune to cure his autistic daughter until the new maid uncovered the truth. Have you ever wondered, can the silence of a child reveal a truth that billions of dollars could never buy? This is not just the story of a successful businessman or a luxurious home. It is the story of a broken heart, of a father who seemed to have everything, yet could not reach the one thing that mattered most. That man's name was Alexander Hughes. He was the founder of a massive medical technology corporation, praised by the media as the golden mind of a new generation. He had triumphed in brutal business deals, crushed rivals in boardrooms, and risen to the top of an unforgiving world. Yet all of those victories turned meaningless the moment he stepped into his vast mansion, a place filled not with joy, but with emptiness and sighs. Because inside that mansion lived a little girl, only 6 years old, Sophie Hughes. Since the day her mother died in a sudden accident, Sophie had fallen into silence. No words, no laughter, no eye contact. Doctors said she had severe autism, and Alexander began a desperate quest to save his daughter. Sophie had once been a lively child. Alexander remembered vividly the afternoons when she ran around the garden, her eyes sparkling with joy, her laughter filling the house. But after her mother's sudden death, Sophie fell into silence. Alexander told himself it was grief, that it would pass. Yet weeks turned into months, and still she did not speak, did not respond. But weeks turned into months, and still she did not speak, did not respond. Every time someone tried to hug her, Sophie panicked, screamed, even clawed at her own skin to break free. Alexander tried everything. He hired the finest speech therapists, brought behavioral experts into his home. He poured enormous sums into specialized programs. Yet Sophie stayed withdrawn. She hated bright lights, loathed loud sounds, and would sit for hours staring at nothing, lost in her own world. The mansion became as cold as a prison. The staff moved quietly through the halls, careful not to trigger Sophie's fear. Caregivers came and went in quick succession. Some left after only a few days, others were dismissed by Alexander himself when he could no longer bear their failure. Deep down, he knew they weren't the problem, but his heart overflowed with anger and helplessness. At night, when everyone else had gone to bed, Alexander would stand silently outside Sophie's room. He listened, hoping for a sound, a sob, a whisper, anything. But behind the door, there was nothing, just a void that swallowed every sound. And it was that emptiness that hurt him the most. In rare moments of reflection, Alexander asked himself, did his daughter even remember him? A crushing fear weighed on his chest that one day Sophie might forget him completely, as if he had never been a part of her world at all. For Alexander, no boardroom battle had ever been as brutal as this helplessness. All he wanted was to hear his daughter's voice again, even if it was only a single word, Daddy. That morning, as pale sunlight slipped through the towering glass windows of the Hughes estate, a quiet woman entered through the back gate. Her name was Elena Rivera. Carrying an old suitcase and a weary posture, she hardly looked like someone about to step into one of the most luxurious homes in the city. Elena was no stranger to medicine. Years ago, she had been a devoted pediatric nurse, praised by colleagues for her patience and compassion with children. But one tragic incident stole everything. A false accusation during a clinic case cost her job, her license, and worst of all, custody of her daughter. From that day, Elena was never the same. She changed her name, took on humble work, and only hoped for a chance to start again. When she was hired as a housekeeper for the Hughes mansion, Elena set strict rules for herself. No closeness, no sharing, no entanglements. Her duties were simple, clean, wash, organize. No contact with Sophie. No conversation with Alexander. No past to be uncovered. On her first day, Elena worked in silence. She mopped floors, tidied the kitchen, folded linens. Most of the staff kept their distance, perhaps accustomed to the coldness of the house. But while sweeping the vast living room, Elena noticed a slight movement behind the long curtains. She paused, then carried on as if nothing happened. Through the gap, a pair of wide eyes stared at her. It was Sophie. In her arms was a worn-out teddy bear, ragged and faded, as if it were the only thing she could hold on to. Sophie didn't speak, didn't approach. She simply stood there, trembling, but not leaving. Elena knew well, don't reach out, don't force. Instead, she continued sweeping, softly humming an old lullaby her grandmother once sang. Not for Sophie, at least not directly, but perhaps, somehow, Sophie would hear. The next day, Elena saw Sophie again, curled up in the upstairs hallway, teddy bear in hand, eyes staring into the distance. Elena gave her a small nod, said nothing, and walked on. No sudden gestures, no loud voice, just calm presence. That evening, while clearing the dining table, Elena noticed a glass of milk left untouched on the counter. The cook sighed. It's for Sophie, but she never drinks it. Elena said nothing, but tucked it away in her heart. That night, when the house was still, she poured a fresh glass of milk and placed it at the corner of the hall where she had last seen Sophie. No glance back, no words, just a quiet act. Days went by, and Elena kept her quiet rhythm. She did not try to shorten the distance, nor did she expect a miracle. Yet small signs began to appear, tiny sparks flickering through a house long wrapped in shadows and silence. One afternoon, as Elena was polishing the glass windows in the living room, she noticed Sophie sitting in the corner, her eyes fixed on her. The teddy bear was still clutched tightly in her arms. Elena said nothing. She continued her work, the steady swipes of her cloth like a quiet heartbeat. Later, she poured a glass of milk and set it on a small table nearby. When she returned, the glass was empty. Elena did not show surprise. She only placed a folded handkerchief beside it, a silent way of saying she saw Sophie, but would never force her. The next day, when Elena stepped into the kitchen, Sophie was already waiting nearby. For the first time, the girl's gaze did not just flicker past, but followed Elena's every movement. Though she did not speak, though she did not smile, her presence alone was a step forward. Elena simply carried on, softly humming that familiar tune. And then the moment came, on a rainy evening. Elena had just finished her chores and lay down wearily on the rug near the fireplace. Her eyes closed halfway, her breathing slowed. At that instant, something touched her chest. Elena opened her eyes. Resting on her chest was a plastic toy stethoscope, the kind children use in doctor play sets. Holding the other end was Sophie. The little girl's eyes were focused, no longer trembling. She pressed the stethoscope against Elena's chest, as if truly listening to her heartbeat. Elena froze, barely daring to breathe. Their eyes met. For the first time in years, Sophie did not look away. No fear, only a quiet, pure connection. And then a voice, small, trembling, but clear, broke the silence. "I'll heal you, Mommy." Elena went still, her heart clenched. The words fell into the quiet, like a miracle. Sophie had spoken. After years of silence, she had spoken, and called her Mommy. Elena did not respond, did not dare disturb the fragile moment. Tears welled, but she remained silent. Sophie kept pressing the toy stethoscope against her chest, her face so earnest that Elena thought her heart might shatter. Just then, footsteps echoed at the doorway. Alexander stood frozen, stunned at the sight. His daughter kneeling beside Elena, clutching the plastic toy, whispering softly, "I'll heal you, Mommy." Alexander's eyes turned to stone. He had waited for years to hear his daughter's voice again, but it was not for him. Sophie did not say, "Daddy." She called Elena Mommy. In that moment, Alexander did not know whether to rejoice, envy, or despair. A part of him crumbled, while another part blazed with fragile hope. He stood motionless, afraid to breathe, knowing he had just witnessed the greatest miracle of his life. After that fateful night, the Hughes mansion was no longer completely silent. Sophie began to show small changes. She did not speak much, but she appeared more often near Elena, her eyes less afraid. At the sound of Elena's humming, Sophie would calm almost instantly. For Alexander, this was both a miracle and a wound. He longed to hear his daughter say, "Daddy." Yet Sophie only sought Elena. He knew he should feel grateful, but instead, a sharp jealousy gnawed at him. Why not him? Why did his beloved daughter open her heart only to a housekeeper? Those questions haunted Alexander through sleepless nights. He watched Elena more closely, searching for answers in her smallest gestures. Elena never tried to overstep her role. She cleaned quietly, kept her distance. Yet it was that very calmness that earned Sophie's absolute trust. Then a name entered the scene. Lina Carter, Alexander's longtime financial advisor. When she learned Sophie had begun speaking to Elena, Lina appeared deeply concerned. In a private meeting, she said bluntly, "Alexander, you're blind. That woman cannot be trusted. I've seen her file. She used to be a nurse but lost her license after a scandal. And worse, she lost custody of her own child." Do you really think someone like that should be near Sophie? Her words cut deep, like a blade turning in his mind. Alexander wanted to deny it, but jealousy made him hesitate. Lina pressed on. "You don't understand. She could be dangerous. End this before it's too late." That night, Alexander sat for hours in his study, staring at an old family photo. He replayed Sophie's whisper, "I'll heal you, Mommy." Sweet words, yet painfully sharp, because he had no place in them. The next morning, Alexander summoned Elena to the kitchen. His voice was cold, like signing a business contract. "You've done your job well, but as of today, you're no longer needed." Elena did not defend herself, did not plead. She only nodded, quietly packed her belongings. Before leaving through the back door, she glanced at Sophie. The little girl stood frozen in the hallway, eyes wide. Elena lifted her hand in a silent farewell, then was gone. That very night, Sophie broke down. She refused food, shoved everything away, screamed until her voice went raw. She banged her head against the wall, tore apart her old teddy bear, crying out again and again, "Mommy!" Alexander rushed to hold her, but Sophie thrashed violently, screaming as if he were a stranger. Helpless, he called doctors, called for medicine, called for every solution. Nothing worked. The night stretched on, filled with her heartbreaking cries, and for the first time Alexander understood. He had made a terrible mistake. Alexander could not sleep after the night Sophie broke down. The image of his daughter screaming herself hoarse, crying, "Mommy!" again and again haunted him like a blade through his chest. At last he understood. No wealth, no advisor could replace the truth. Elena was the one Sophie needed. At dawn, Alexander drove to the small apartment where Elena was staying. When the door opened, she looked at him with calm eyes. Not surprised, not angry, just tired. Alexander clenched his fists, his voice rough. "I was wrong. I let doubt blind me. Sophie needs you, and so do I. Please come back." Elena stayed silent for a few seconds, sorrow flickering in her gaze. "You cast me out so easily, Alexander. How do I know this time will be different?" Alexander stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Because this time, I'm not asking only for Sophie. I'm asking for myself. I need someone who can see what I never could. Please, give me a chance to make it right." Elena let out a soft sigh. The guardedness in her eyes slowly faded, replaced by a fragile spark of hope. She nodded gently. "All right, but this time, not just for Sophie, for all of us." From the day Elena returned, the atmosphere of the Hughes mansion shifted. Sophie began to laugh softly, sometimes even chirping, "Mommy," or repeating short words. Alexander would sit quietly, watching, his heart slowly eased. The house that once drowned in silence now echoed with a child's laughter. And for the first time in years, it felt alive again. But not everyone in the household welcomed this change. From the shadows, eyes followed every tender moment. Lina Carter, the woman who had always believed Alexander would forever rely on her, now saw him offering that gentleness to Elena. A slow-burning jealousy consumed her, turning every giggle from Sophie into a dagger twisting in her chest. And from that jealousy, a dangerous plan began to take shape in Lina's mind. Lina Carter had stood beside Alexander for years, a devoted right hand. But deep within, she held a secret no one knew, a hidden love for him. And so, when she saw Alexander gently bringing Elena back, when she watched Sophie laughing in that woman's arms, jealousy burned her heart like wildfire. "She's just a stranger. Why did you choose her instead of me?" Lina whispered into the dark, and her resentment twisted into a plan. Only weeks later, rumors began to spread through the neighborhood around the Hughes estate. Elena was a thief, once caught stealing jewelry from her former employer. The gossip reached Alexander. He tried to dismiss it, yet seeds of doubt had already taken root. Lina didn't stop there. She spread an even crueler lie, that Elena had once sold her own daughter for money. The slander cut like a blade, striking Elena's very soul. When Alexander, clouded by doubt, brought it up, Elena's heart broke in silence. Days later, unable to endure the whispers any longer, she confronted Lina directly. One late afternoon, in the wide garden, everything erupted. Elena threw her cleaning cloth onto the ground, eyes blazing red with fury and grief. "Do you truly believe such filth, Alexander? After everything you've seen, do you honestly think I could sell my own child for money?" Alexander's fists clenched, his voice rough. "I don't want to believe it, but the words, they surround me. I don't know what's true anymore." Elena let out a bitter laugh, tears spilling. "You don't know. I've been here, day after day, hour after hour, helping Sophie, bringing her laughter back. I've poured my whole heart into this house, and yet a few whispers are enough for you to turn on me?" Anger rose in Alexander. He stepped closer, his voice sharp. "Elena, I lost my wife. I cannot lose Sophie too. If there is any danger to her, I have to protect her." Elena trembled, but her eyes blazed. "Danger? I was the one beside Sophie when everyone else gave up. I was the one who heard her voice return. And now you dare call me the danger?" Their shouts shook the garden. From a distance, Lina watched with a cruel smile, savoring her scheme's success. One gray afternoon, Elena confronted Lina in the garden behind the mansion. Dark clouds loomed overhead, as if reflecting the storm in their hearts. Elena stepped forward, her voice trembling yet sharp. "Why are you doing this? I've already lost everything. What more do you want from me?" Lina sneered, her lips curling with disdain. "You think you deserve any of this? A servant with a filthy past, a pathetic failure? You dare to crawl into Alexander's life? You don't belong here." Elena's voice cracked, tears brimming in her eyes. "I never wanted to replace anyone. I only want to stay because Sophie needs me." The words only fanned Lina's rage. She shouted, eyes blazing with frenzy, "No! Sophie needs Alexander, and Alexander needs me. You're nothing but a stain, tricking him with cheap pity. You even sold your own child. What else wouldn't you sell?" The words cut like knives. Elena shook, but instead of collapsing, she lunged forward and seized Lina's arm. They fell into a violent struggle, crashing onto the wet grass. Heavy breaths, tearing fabric, and furious cries echoed through the garden. Elena sobbed as she fought back, screaming, "You know nothing! When will it ever be enough?" Lina glared, her voice hoarse with fury. "When Alexander is mine, and you are gone forever!" The clash raged until a small cry sliced through the air. "Mommy, stop!" Sophie burst from the garden door, clutching her teddy bear, eyes wide with terror. She trembled as she stood between the two women, tears streaming down her face. Elena immediately let go, collapsing onto the grass, gasping for breath. Lina froze too, though her eyes still burned with venom. Sophie shook her head, her voice breaking as she begged, "Please, no more fighting." The moment froze the world around them. From across the yard, Alexander came running, his heart seizing as he saw his little girl standing between two women, locked in fury. In that instant, he understood. It was anger and suspicion that had dragged them all to the edge of danger, and Sophie was the one paying the price. Alexander rushed forward, his heart seizing at the sight of Sophie trembling between the two women. He scooped her into his arms, shouting with raw desperation, "Enough! No one touches her again!" He turned, fury blazing toward Elena, his voice cutting like a blade. "You've crossed the line. I trusted you with Sophie, and now you've dragged her into this chaos. Leave this house! Now!" Elena froze. Her heart shattered, yet she did not argue. Eyes red, she stepped back as if ready to disappear once more. Behind her, Lorina's lips curled into a sly smile, the smile of someone convinced she had won. But before Elena could take another step, Sophie broke free from Alexander's hold and ran straight into her arms. Her tear-streaked eyes burned with a rare determination. "No, Daddy," Sophie cried, her voice trembling but firm. "You're wrong. She didn't do this. It was her. She started it." Alexander froze. His chest pounded. Sophie had never spoken so much at once, never poured out her words so fiercely. Sobbing, Sophie pressed her face into Elena's shoulder and confessed, "It was her. It was Lina. She told me I couldn't talk to you. She said if I did, she'd take me away. She said you were going to marry her. And then I'd never have a mommy at all." Elena's body stiffened, while Alexander's face drained of color. The ground beneath him seemed to crumble. Clutching Elena tighter, Sophie spoke the words that shattered her father's world. "I'm not sick. She faked the papers. I was never sick. I was just scared of her." The world went still. Alexander swung his gaze to Lina, eyes sharp as knives, his voice hoarse with rage. "Is it true, Lina?" she stammered, struggling to hold composure. "Alexander, you can't trust a child's words. She doesn't know what she's saying." But Sophie didn't stop. Her little hands trembled as she opened the small recorder hidden inside the teddy bear. "I recorded everything," she whispered, then pressed play. Lorina's voice echoed, cold and clear. "That stupid girl will never dare to speak. I've already threatened her. Alexander will never know. Once he marries me, everything will be mine." A mocking laugh followed, then Lorina's hiss. "I hate Elena. She's just a cheap servant who dared to seduce the man I've loved for years. She will have to disappear, forever." The air shattered into deadly silence. Alexander froze, his eyes burning red. He turned to Lina, his voice hoarse. "Was it you? Everything I just heard?" Lina trembled, still trying to salvage her ground. "Alexander, you can't trust a child's recording. It's edited. Silence!" Alexander roared, his voice thundering across the garden. "You lied, destroyed Elena's honor, and forced my daughter to live in fear. All because of your sick selfishness." Lina turned pale, her body shaking uncontrollably. The confidence in her eyes had vanished, replaced only by panic. Alexander dropped to his knees, wrapping both Sophie and Elena in his arms. His voice broke with sorrow. "Daddy is sorry. It's all Daddy's fault. My daughter was never sick. You were only hidden under shadows and lies." Sophie buried her face against her father's chest, her tiny shoulders trembling. The garden air turned heavy after the recording ended. Alexander stood frozen for a moment, his eyes bloodshot, his breath sharp. Whatever trust he once had in Lina had burned to ashes in an instant. He raised a trembling hand toward the gate, his voice low but thunderous, every word like a sentence passed. "Get out of my house, now. From this moment on, you will never set foot here again." Lina's face drained of color, her lips quivering as she tried to protest. "Alexander, you must believe me. This is all a misunderstanding." "Enough!" Alexander's shout cracked through the garden like a whip. "I let you deceive me for too long. You destroyed Elena's name. You poisoned my daughter's heart with fear. This ends here." Elena held Sophie close, her eyes brimming with tears, yet burning with resolve. Sophie clung to her, whispering, "Mommy, she won't come back again, will she?" Alexander knelt, resting a steady hand on his daughter's shoulder. His tone softened, but the firmness remained. "No, sweetheart, she will never come back." Lina stood frozen in shock for a moment, then turned sharply and left. Her figure disappeared beyond the gates, carrying with it all her bitterness and defeat. For the first time in years, the Hughes household breathed free of shadows. After the night the truth came to light, Alexander spent hours in his study, Sophie's recorder lying on the desk. Each time he pressed play, Lina's venomous words sliced deeper into him. He wasn't just furious at the betrayal. He was ashamed. Ashamed for letting suspicion wound Elena and trap Sophie in fear. The next morning, Alexander handed the recording to his lawyer. He demanded immediate legal action. No more mercy, no more hesitation. "I want the truth exposed," he declared. "Not only to protect my daughter, but to make sure no child ever suffers the same fate again." News of the lawsuit spread quickly. The media swarmed, headlines blazing. Shocking scandal. Hughes Corporation advisor accused of fraud, falsified child medical records. On the day of trial, the courtroom was packed. Lina walked in with a stiff face, her eyes betraying anxiety. Before judge and public alike, the recording from Sophie's teddy bear was played, loud and clear. Every jealous word, every whispered scheme echoed through the hall. Sophie sat beside Elena, clutching her hand. Though small, her gaze was steady, like a fragile witness daring to confront the darkness. Alexander's lawyer presented more evidence, altered medical files, forged signatures, manipulated reports. Each document struck like a hammer, smashing the wall of lies Lina had built. When Alexander took the stand, he faced Lina directly. His voice was firm but heavy with emotion. "You turned my grief into a weapon, my daughter's silence into a tool for your ambition. You forged records, spread lies, and smeared the only woman who brought Sophie hope. I was blind. But today, the truth will not be hidden." Lina tried to argue, but it was too late. The evidence was undeniable. Finally, the judge ruled Lina Carter was guilty of falsification, defamation, and abuse of power. She was sentenced to prison and further investigations were ordered. In the courtroom, Elena wept, not from triumph, but from the relief of darkness finally lifting. Sophie leaned against her shoulder, whispering softly, "Mommy, we're free now." Alexander turned, eyes glistening. He clasped Elena's and Sophie's hands tightly. At last, he understood. Justice was not only about punishing the guilty, it was about restoring truth to those who had nearly lost it forever. The night after the trial, the Hughes mansion was quiet. Lina was gone, but the wounds she left still bled in their hearts. Alexander sat in the living room, his glass of wine untouched. Elena entered, her eyes tired, yet gentle. They sat across from each other, silent for a long time. Finally, Alexander spoke, his voice hoarse. "For years I thought I was strong. I buried myself in work and money to hide the loss. But the truth is, I was a coward, too afraid to face my wife's death, too afraid to see my daughter sinking into loneliness." Elena lowered her gaze, her hands gripping her dress. "I was the same. I lost my child, my name, everything to lies. Some nights I dreamed I heard her call me Mommy, only to wake to an empty room. I thought I had died long ago, just a body still breathing." Alexander met her eyes, seeing himself reflected there, a soul torn yet still longing to live. He whispered, "Maybe that's why Sophie chose you. She saw your pain was like hers. And I see it too. Elena, I don't want to lose you again. I've made too many mistakes." A pause hung heavy, then Elena's voice trembled. "Are you sure, Alexander? I'm not perfect. I'm scarred, haunted by a broken past." He reached for her hand, steady and firm. "That's why I need you, not to replace anyone, but to walk forward with me. I love you." Too, the clumsy yet sincere confession brought tears to her eyes. They didn't speak further, only leaned against each other in quiet solace. In the days that followed, their bond grew, silent flames burning steady. Then one afternoon, Sophie caught them sitting close, hands entwined. Her eyes widened, mouth covered in surprise. "Daddy, Mommy, you're in love, aren't you?" Elena blushed. Alexander stumbled for words, but Sophie burst into pure laughter. She threw her arms around them and exclaimed, "I knew it! I chose Mommy because her pain was like mine. Let's heal together." Alexander and Elena stared at her, then laughed through tears. The three embraced in the living room, their laughter echoing away the shadows. Months later, a small but warm wedding was held in the flower-filled garden. Elena wore a simple white dress. Alexander clasped her hand firmly. Sophie scattered petals, shouting, "Yay! Our new family!" After the wedding, Alexander used his influence and devotion to help Elena regain custody of her daughter. Justice prevailed, and at last 3-year-old Isabella returned to her mother's arms. The day Isabella arrived at the Hughes mansion, Sophie ran to greet her. The two girls looked at each other for a moment, then burst into giggles, quickly holding hands and racing across the yard. No barriers, only innocent joy. Elena watched, tears slipping down her cheeks. This time not bitter, but pure. Alexander wrapped his arm around her, whispering, "We lost so many years in darkness, but from now on, there will only be light." In the laughter of two children and the warmth of the man beside her, Elena knew she finally had a family. A real family. Years passed, and the Hughes mansion was no longer a cold house. The walls were covered with children's drawings, the halls echoed with laughter instead of heavy footsteps. Sophie was now 10, Isabella 6. They grew up like true sisters, often sitting together, drawing or whispering secrets only they understood. Whenever one of them laughed, the entire home seemed to glow brighter. Alexander stood on the porch, a cup of tea in hand, his eyes following the girls as they chased each other in the garden. Elena came beside him, gently draping a shawl over his shoulders. They stood in silence, no words needed. Everything they had once longed for was now right before them. Elena whispered softly, "Do you see? We really have healed each other." Alexander squeezed her hand, his voice warm and steady. "Not just healed, Elena. We've found life again." At that moment, Sophie ran over, pulling Isabella along, shouting, "Daddy, Mommy, let's take a family picture." Alexander laughed, wrapping his arms around them all. In the camera's frame, a simple yet radiant image was captured. 4 people, once broken by lies and loss, now standing together as one family. A family reborn. No shadow could touch them anymore. Only love, laughter, and a radiant future ahead.